Augmented reality is just placing digital content in the real world. The George Floyd project is me taking a 3D model of a bust of George Floyd and creating an AR experience with it where I can build the app, put it on my phone, and then go out into Portland, like during COVID and during all the craziness, and install 30-foot monuments in the hotspots of Portland. And I recorded and documented how I made the app and just sort of made an online course for it. And then also made an app for like Android phones that people could just install and go out into the world and just experience it themselves. It was both just like expression and education sort of combined into this one project. During that time, it is the height of social civil unrest, especially in Portland. And so for me, I was also going through the process of applying to medical school. I wanted to engage in a way that was authentic and spoke to, my interests, but I didn't want to subject myself to the problems and the realities of me going out into the world. And so while people would go out, I would just be working on my computer trying to figure out how to make it work. And there's a video of people walking around and interacting with it. And there's pictures of it actually in these real world locations. And so it's like, you can't tell me it didn't exist. I just didn't need to get a permit for it, right? And I didn't need to subject myself to all of the mitigating factors that would put me at risk for something. After the George Floyd project, Portland Community College reached out to me and said that they had this opportunity for me to help them teach emerging technology to a group of Black and Brown students. The access points for me to learn how to play football and basketball were all over the place. But when it came to learning stuff outside of that, I noticed that there was a void in STEM, particularly for Black youth. Why can't somebody with a computer and a dream create something awesome and then provide opportunities for themselves and other people? For me, it started with just working on that project, the George Floyd project, putting that out, sharing my story, sharing my experience, how I did this. And then from there, it created opportunities to where I can actually teach other students how to do exactly what I did, organically and authentically.
Thanks so much for joining us. And Stephen, such a powerful video that you showed in terms of telling your story. Tell us about your personal introduction to augmented reality and when the light bulb exactly went off to want to make the switch to study it further.
Yeah, so I think my initial introduction was actually from a spot on the Breakfast Club where Will.I.am, he had this augmented reality graphic novel, and he was like, okay, uh, you had the graphic novel, it was done by Marvel, all that stuff, and, it's sort of Black storytelling. But then he said, check this out, I got this app, and this app will have the stuff sort of pop off the page. And so I saw that and I was like, oh crap, like, that is exactly what I've been trying to figure out how to do, because as an animator, somebody that works in sort of YouTube animation and digital animation, I wanted to find a way to combine comics, physical comics, with digital animation, and outside of just being a YouTube video. And so I sort of got introduced to that. And then a couple years later, I ended up going to Adobe Max, and that's where they were launching Adobe Aero. And so I literally got to touch all the different things that, like, with augmented reality that I saw in the Breakfast Club, and then really got to say, okay, this is how you do it. You could use these tools, and I was just sort of bit by the bug by then. It was pretty organic and pretty crazy. I felt like once that hit, the rest was history.
So the connection that a lot of people have to augmented reality, basically overlaying digital images onto the real world. The experience they get today is through like camera filters on social media or through video games. So what looks did you get when you told people that, hey, I want to use AR, but instead of going in those directions, I wanted to do something like to honor the memory of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor?
Honestly, it was unfathomable for people to actually understand. And I think across the board with AR, it's just until you see it in action, you have no concept of like what that can possibly be. And so from just me saying, okay, I'm gonna just add a comic and augment that comic, people just didn't understand it till they saw it. And so to this vein, it was like, you know, Blackness, activism, social impact, and augmented reality. There was no reference point. And so for me, I just had the luxury of just actually building out that reference point so that others can see what I saw in my head.
So but even in having those conversations with people, it can be a bit of a leap to in terms of activism and advocating against police brutality and things like that, making the connection to say like, hey, I want to use activism in this particular way. When you introduce that concept to people, I'm sure the looks that you got in 2020 might still be continuing today. So walk through that and just how you coach people on exactly the importance and value in this.
Yeah, so it's really focused on problems and solutions. And so the reason AR is powerful in certain instances, I wouldn't say every instance, but in certain instances, is because it addresses a very specific problem that exists, and it provides a solution that mitigates, extrinsic factors. And so for me, when I was working on the George Floyd project, one, I was sort of in the back of my mind seeing that like, okay, AR because of COVID is starting to become more popular, and so the skill set is required. And so just from a access point, it's like, these things are built with free tools already. So how do I make it? How do I address sort of that gap that already exists within Black communities with these free tools already? And then it was like, okay, for COVID and social unrest, and me being in Portland, right? Like people were getting snatched up. Proud Boys were coming out in full force and everything. So that comes with a risk to life and livelihood. And so I was like, through AR, knowing how Portland is very fine, Portland is wonderful during the day, but it really sort of picks up at night. And when people are out, I was like, okay, how can I create something that has an impact that I could take pictures with, I can record, I could have exist in a world, but then not have to sort of garner attention in real time. And so through AR, I was able to put something that would ultimately cost a lot of resources, get a lot of time, and I could do that through the comfort of my own sort of like discretion. And I could scale it as high as possible, and I could fine tune it, I could tweak it, I could iterate very fast with it, and then I could put that out and I could use that as a storytelling piece. And so yes, it's just a 3D model on a surface, and then some pictures are being taken of it. That's sort of the technical, you know, that's the technicality of it. But the storytelling piece of, okay, this is what you can do so that you don't have to ask for a permit. You don't have to ask for permission to express yourself and express your Blackness. You don't have to do that because AR exists. And therefore, it has a grand impact to where I can make a Black Mount Rushmore, and I don't have to ask permission for that. I just need to know the steps to do that.
So the title for the discussion is decoding bias. So you live on the West Coast, but I believe you grew up in California. So could you explain to me, is there a connection between the work that you're doing today and some of the creations that you have to efforts to you not only advocate but illustrate some of the disparities within tech more broadly, or biases that may kind of creep into content development?
Yeah, yeah. And it's like my core foundations on, as a creator, just in general, has been focused on uh, educating, empowering, and entertaining. And I think those core pillars really sum sort of my experiences, not only with, playing football and progressing to college and doing all that, but also into education and really just thinking about all the things that I'm really interested in, whether it be technical or something. There's always an educational component. You sort of learn and you improve and you iterate. There's always an empowerment component once you have that education to where you can go out into the world. And then really that the thing that really grabs you is that entertaining piece. Is like, it's fun to do this. Like it's really enjoyable, and being able to share and build community around that, that's where that entertainment piece really comes into. And so, me coming from, Sacramento and the Bay Area, and understanding the history of the Black Panther Party and all that stuff. Really, I think it's something that I always grew up around, and I always saw the disparities of me trying to do these things that were non-stereotypical, and then comparing those to the stereotypical things that I did. Right, I sort of had that, stereotypical play football, go to college on a scholarship, try to find opportunities from that. After football left, and it was just like crap, like what is life? Like, I'm back sleeping on couches, all these different things. Whereas, and that's just because I didn't fit the mold anymore. And so then I literally went through this journey over the past 6, 7 years, just really trying to find my identity that doesn't, perpetuate these stereotypes anymore. And I think ultimately, like through the work that I'm doing, as I'm sharing stories and talking about my experiences, I think I'm starting to find that, where I'm not just a has-been football player, right? Like I'm more than that. And I think the work that I'm creating, it's really just that conversation that I'm having just with myself and the world of like, what is the value of me as a person rather than me as my body?
So in thinking about that value, there's a question that came in from the audience that I'd like to slide in because it kind of speaks directly to some of that work and activism. So one question says, would you consider your use of AR as a way to feel like an activist? And feel safety and feel safer. Like you talked about this earlier in the presentation in terms of it gave creating the George Floyd bust made it you could actually place the monument in places so that you wouldn't have to go outside. Was your safety sort of a deciding factor in kind of wanting to do something like that?
Oh yeah, yeah. I kid you not. For that 100 days, or like when people were sort of like getting snatched up and stuff, like the stuff that was getting the news in Portland, I live 5 blocks from there. And so I remember when I would just look outside because me and my girlfriend live on the fourth floor. We would see just like cops with riot gear, just like hanging off of like white vans. We would see just parades of just like Trump supporter, just flags and like all this stuff just going crazy. And so there's a very big risk of safety because I know many of people that got hit with sandbags and batons and got snatched up that I currently work with, and in these Zoom meetings, you hop on a Zoom meeting and then you see somebody with a black eye, and it's just because they went outside, and so and they wanted to express themselves and stuff, and then obviously with COVID, and so during that time, I was like, I'm exploring these. I'm really learning how to navigate it, really figuring out the avenues with it. And then I'm also trying to apply to medical school. So it's like if I got a case, if I'm snatched up by the feds and I have to go through litigation and all that stuff, I'm probably, as a Black person, I'm probably not going to get into medical school if things don't work out for me, in that. And so I was really thinking, like, there was just so many things that were happening to where I knew, and I'm tapped into like sort of like my surroundings and sort of the things that are happening around here to where I knew when the right time was for these things. And so I was like, okay, I know when I could do these things and I know that it will work. I just need to figure out how to do it in the most efficient way possible. That way I'm not paying for it, 6 months later.
That makes sense. There's another audience question that addresses something that I wanted to bring up. It's from Kate Niece Mason, and it's how Stephen, how do you use your voice and really for the first time in history, basically using uh, how to present culturally relevant and technological like experiences to convince to present these stories not only for individuals but potentially for businesses and corporations like there's how do you present culturally relevant and technologically sophisticated messages not just for individual audiences but for folks who might be outside of for might be either for businesses or corporations and exactly how do you do that?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about the use of AR as like a storytelling tool, I wholeheartedly think that AR is a medium just like animation or just like video or Instagram tweets or anything like that. It's just a medium. And so, you could do demos, and there's a lot of demos out there of like AR for AR's sake. That's really just testing the capabilities of it, but that's not really addressing the storytelling piece. And so it's really, for me, it's always comes down to, can I articulate it on paper? And then if I could articulate it on paper, then what is the experience from that paper that I could use to manifest an AR experience. And so it's all about creating the experience and what the end user, the person, is going to experience by engaging in this work. For me, I tell stories about the Black experience. And so, what does that look like to see Black experiences uh, in augmented reality? It's visceral, it's edgy. It has a spice to it, like I love doing dance scenes. So like, what does it look like for animated characters to do TikTok dances, which are, culturally relevant and speak to the identities of Black people without excluding them from technology, but propelling them with technology. And so, in short, it's much like every other storytelling piece. It's just I think you have to understand and you have to engage with the technology. And as you engage with the technology, you have to also be creative in that space. Oh, you can do this with AR? So what if I have this idea to create something that allows me to make more interactions? I guess for me um, in books in particular, because I could give an example for books, we understand that books you can touch and you can see the books, right? You can read the pictures on the page, but what if you can hear the book? What if you can add more senses to the book experience? What if you could add interactions to the book where you could click a panel, you could click a part of the book, and then something happens in AR? And so it's really saying, okay, this is what AR is capable of. And so now it's up to you to figure out how you want to use it to tell the stories that you want to engage with. And I think that's across the board for business solutions, for creators trying to create in the space. It's really all about it's at the end of the day, it's all about what your creativity lends to with those tools.
And one interesting thing, you have a YouTube channel. You teach at local library, and you obviously share a lot of the knowledge that you have and try to present different ways, and especially doing outreach to young people. So one question I have, especially as you think about this technology going forward, where do you see the biggest opportunities in integrating augmented reality into STEM curriculum, even for younger generations? And then how do you see this content addressing an access gap in terms of information and exposure to this technology?
Yeah, so you might have to repeat the second question, but the first question is, we've seen, because of TikTok and because of all these things, the capabilities of creativity for younger people, right? And so with it's with AR and with emerging technology, it's our job to say, okay, we see that you have untapped potential creatively. Here's the tools and here's the direction to tap into that creativity, but use it and develop skills that can pay off in the long run. And so we're seeing that, like, in AR by 2025 is going to be this 120, like 140, $200 billion industry. That means that there's going to be jobs that people need to have skills for. And so you could teach somebody to download Unity or Unreal off the internet right now with a computer, and then say, here's, take these steps to explore your creativity and develop the skills and also make something cool. And so for my work, it's really focused on, I make cool stuff that people will pay for. And then I have the liberty to open up the hood and teach people how to make those exact things. It probably won't be exactly what it is because the end product is sort of a byproduct of my personal creativity and what I've explored. But you could apply those skills to something else, very much like I did with football, where I just show up to the field. I learned from guys that went to the league, and now I'm able to, and now I ended up getting a scholarship, and I was able to do things the way that I was able to navigate with. And so it's for me, I just really applied just the things that made me successful in other areas, and I just applied to this, and that's ultimately it. And so, could you repeat the other question?
Yeah, I guess, since we're even running short on time, I think, do you see as the best ways in terms of bridging the gap? Because a lot of this technology, like a lot of the curriculum, don't exist at the collegiate level yet,
Yeah.
because the technology is so new. So what needs to happen, or what would you recommend investing in to make sure that younger generations, especially Black and Brown students who might not have exposure to this, still have the opportunity to pursue careers like this down the road?
Yeah, I think it's really making it relevant to them. And so, you could learn how to animate, you could learn how to develop AR stuff, but for what reason? And so the goal is, if you can teach somebody to make an AR comic or make some sort of AR animation, and then they can share it with their friends and get millions of views, then that's success right there. And that's STEM. And that's how you can make it relevant.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen. Appreciate your time.